we all know what the Auburn fans love to jokingly call this guy, which is Husky Harsin, right? This idea that he's an outsider, just like some of the other outsiders that have failed when they tried to come to the SEC. Well, DeBoer obviously, I mean, he brought a lot of his own guys over, but Womack is his Southern connection.
Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone, AL.com's Alabama football podcast. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com, and joining me today is our good friend and Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalisi. Matt, welcome back. You know, as it turns out, this is episode 100 of the podcast, and I'm not really sure what to do with that information, so I'll turn it over to you. How do you feel about hitting that milestone?
Well, it's a tremendous volume of look, quantity over quality. That's what I say about this show. No, I mean, look, it's cool that we've put out this many episodes just talking about Alabama football mainly. I mean, we've done a few episodes that are delving into other sports, but like I think this just shows that it's absolutely normal if you're one of those people that can only manage to talk about Alabama football all the time. This because we've done 100 episodes of this in a little over a year, basically.
It's flown by. It's really cool, kind of scary, but I mean, we should start by thanking anyone and everyone who's listened to or watched the show, anyone who has rated or reviewed us on Apple Podcasts, left a comment or two on YouTube, shared it, subscribed. We appreciate y'all so much for giving us a shot, sticking with us for this long. We do this show for Alabama football fans, really college football fans. We want it to be the best Alabama football podcast out there. That's at least what we strive for with respect to all the others that you have to choose from. There are a lot of really good ones, but we love doing it. So, Matt, here's to 100 and here's to at least 100 more.
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, I think also I'm really looking forward to talking about the season on this show because, we started this show with really very little idea of what we were heading into in that first Kalen DeBoer season. Now we've got a little bit more of a sense, at least like the table is set, right? We're like, we have a little bit better understanding of the story up to this point and the characters and maybe a little better idea of where we're going and what to expect. But I'll use this to segue into, Ben. I mean, obviously the key character in all of this right now is Kalen DeBoer. And as listeners of this show know, you got a sit down with him that we all got to listen to last week. And I'd love to hear more of how that came about. I mean, I think a lot of people wonder when an interview like this happens, when you get a one-on-one with a coach, like what was it like, to be on the other side of that and to set that up. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so it was a 2-on-1 in this case.
That's
because our good pal and AL.com football beat writer Nick Kelly was there with me to have the sit down with Kalen DeBoer. And
double coverage.
Yeah, that's right, 2-on-1, but he handled both of us beautifully. Nick, look, I mean, credit to Nick. He's the known commodity around the Alabama football program in that building, and he's a tremendous reporter who has a great reputation, and a lot of people have a lot of respect for him across the beat and also across the athletics program. So we give Nick all the credit for putting us in that position, and we thank him for being a part of this podcast. And he's been a big reason why we've hit 100 episodes. But a lot of that, based on what you were saying, was us processing the Kalen DeBoer era, the end of the Saban era, the Kalen DeBoer era, and I think that 100 episodes, at least 93 of that has been like therapy for us and
That's
talking
right.
through it. But in a lot of that has been trying to understand and get to know Kalen DeBoer, the new guy on the block, and somebody who is brand new to SEC football, certainly to Alabama, comes from across the country from Washington, and he's a guy whose reputation as a coach we only know based on the limited access and exposure that we've had to Washington football. He wasn't a guy that I think a lot of Alabama fans had on their radar before his name became one of the trending in terms of the coaching search, and also when he was winning a lot of games in 2024 or I'm sorry, 2023, when Washington made it to the college football playoff and ultimately the championship game where Alabama fell just short of reaching. And so it was cool to have that opportunity to not only help Alabama fans get to know him a little bit better, but to just sit right in front of him and have a conversation with him. And it's the first time I've ever had just a straight up conversation with an Alabama head coach. There have been some encounters here and there over the years, but never just face to face where I get to ask a series of questions. And it was really cool of DeBoer and Alabama to accommodate us and let us do that. We took a crew of 5 people from AL.com over to the Alabama football building, the Malmore building, as they call it, or as it's called. And we got to set up in a recruiting lounge in that building and take over and move a bunch of furniture out of the way to configure it how we wanted to in terms of the set that we were building for the interview. But there were a few takeaways that I had from it that I think Alabama fans might enjoy hearing about, is like when it comes to going behind the scenes, because for years and years, Alabama fans, they just see what's on the field. They don't get to spend a lot of time in buildings like that and having those one-on-one conversations with Kalen DeBoer. So a couple of things, Matt, I'll go through and you just react how you want to here. But my first thing was, Nick Kelly, again, who I mentioned, who did the interview with me, we came away with the same conclusion here. And it's that Kalen DeBoer is locked in right now. I mean, it's year 2 for him as head coach at Alabama. It was clear to me from his answers, both on camera and off camera, that his overall tone and mood right now, to me, suggests that he knows that it's put up or shut up time in Tuscaloosa. And, it goes back to everything we covered last year, but most programs and fan bases, they'd be thrilled about 9 wins in a head coach's first season. But, we know what the expectations are in Tuscaloosa, especially when, DeBoer and his staff were left with the resources that they had with what Nick Saban had built for 17 years in his staffs. So, DeBoer was really good natured and he was hospitable. He lived up to that reputation of being a nice guy. He humored us. He had some laughs, but he very quickly, again, whether the cameras were rolling and when they weren't, he quickly switched into that gear that said, I'm focused. This team is focused. Regardless of what the results may be in 2025, my takeaway was that he came across as a coach who knows now, it's clear to him in his words, his actions, his demeanor, that Alabama has to win now.
Yeah, and I will say, just watching the interview, my one thing that I noticed that fits into what you're talking about, look, that first that first, particularly the introductory press conference, I think looking back on it now, he seemed, I don't want to say he didn't handle it well, but he sounds like a guy who doesn't quite know what to say. It's a big situation that he'd never been in before. Washington is a program with a lot of resources and some history of its own, but it ain't Alabama. It's not that level of program. And I couldn't help but feel like he was arriving in Tuscaloosa and sort of it was all hitting him once he was there, of like, this is bigger than I thought it was going to be in some ways. But now watching him in this one, I think he has a much better understanding of the environment that he's in. And I don't want to say he's feeling the pressure, but I think it is important to understand the pressure and know what it means and what the expectations are in a more specific way. And to me, he seems a lot more like a guy who's got his feet under him now than this time a year ago.
Yeah, it seems like he's in control now. It seems like very much his program, and he's got a lot of confidence about what they're building, and more on that in a second. But I didn't get the impression that he was like in over his head or anything. And I think a lot of people thought, regardless whether it was Kalen DeBoer or whomever else came in to follow Nick Saban, that was sort of the temperature that they would get from whoever tried to fill those shoes. And that certainly doesn't appear to be the case. It wasn't the case in the first few games while he was head coach, and obviously in the Georgia game when that was the first moment when it was like, okay, this is it. Like, what are we getting from Kalen DeBoer? And they come out and they go up 28-0 in the game, and everybody thinks, okay, the future is sound. And then we obviously saw how the rest of the season played out. But I think that he's a guy who knows how to win. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to run a program. And obviously that's different, like you said, in Tuscaloosa. But, honestly, there's a contrast between the last head coach and the current head coach. We all know everything about Nick Saban at this point, but we're learning more and more about who Kalen DeBoer is. And that was the point of this interview, is to try to peel back some of those layers, to show off his personality a little bit. So my second sort of takeaway here, and this is something that I think is going to be clear to a lot of people, but you kind of wonder, like, is that how they are in front of the cameras on TV, or do they change at all behind the scenes? So while we were setting up in this recruiting lounge that I mentioned, this was very close to DeBoer's office in that building. And I mentioned we had a crew of 5 guys, and, we're moving furniture around and we're arranging what the set would look like when we sit down. And in walks defensive coordinator Kane Womack. And Nick Kelly, he's covered Alabama for several years. And so he's, again, I said earlier, he's known around the facility. But he and Kane strike up conversation. Nick introduces me to him. And, honestly, it's just like talking to some guy in the concession line at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Like, and I mean that as a compliment, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, he's the most down-to-earth football coach that I've ever been around at any level. Like, we're just shooting the breeze. I mean, let alone being the defensive coordinator for the best college football program in the country. But, my takeaway there is this kind of gets at our conversation that we'll have in just a little bit about recruiting, but this must be really good for recruiting. Like, these guys are obviously well-compensated people who are expected to win at the highest level in this sport. And they're able to hold conversations with anyone, including goons like us who are just trying to do an interview. and you have to think that really translates in living rooms, not only with the kids that, they want to play here, but their parents, their siblings, whomever that they need to convince their kids are in good hands when they're in Tuscaloosa. That to me was also the thing about sitting in front of Kalen DeBoer. I remember a very popular author from Alabama named Rick Bragg. People will be familiar with him. He worked at the Birmingham News years ago. He teaches at the University of Alabama. I actually took a class of his in grad school many years ago, but he famously wrote this profile for Sports Illustrated about Nick Saban shortly after he arrived in Tuscaloosa. Years later, Bragg would say about the time that he spent with Nick Saban, quote, "I've interviewed suspected serial killers. I've interviewed suspected terrorists. I've interviewed people who went to prison for killing men. I've interviewed a bunch of scary people, but Saban made me nervous," end quote. And I always love that quote about him. And if you talk to him about that interview, he'd tell you the same thing. But, DeBoer obviously doesn't have that quality, at least not yet, right? Like, maybe he's working his way towards that, and your winning reputation sort of like builds mystique. But I think that this is all by design. Like, a lot of great coaches and teachers, DeBoer is a guy who really believes in relationships and personal connections that he makes with the people that he works with, the kids that he coaches. And it's clear that he's trying to reach people at their level. So, this nice guy or this regular guy quality is one that appears to be working in his favor so far.
Well, I think also it's an acknowledgement that DeBoer understands that connection to the South is not an underrated, or it's not an overrated aspect of this job, right? I mean, and I look, we all know what the Auburn fans love to jokingly call this guy, which is Husky Harsin, right? This idea that he's an outsider, just like some of the other outsiders that have failed when they tried to come to the SEC. Well, DeBoer obviously, I mean, he brought a lot of his own guys over, but Womack is his Southern connection for sure. This is a guy who played in the SEC. He coached at multiple SEC schools, including, by the way, coached for Hugh Freeze. He was on Hugh Freeze's staff at Ole Miss. So this is a guy who gets not just the general vibe of the South and the state of Alabama, but he knows a lot of the characters and their tendencies that are on Alabama's schedule every year. And that's another, I think, crucial element of building a staff at an SEC school. People who've sort of been part of this universe and they get what they're up against. And I mean, look, to me, it's not surprising to hear that Womack has that folksiness about him and that personal connection. But also, his guys really seem to love playing for him, and I think evidenced by the fact that they really got progressively better over the course of that season.
Yeah, for the third takeaway here, Matt, I was really curious just about the narrative and something we'll be talking about a lot this year, the narrative of year two and the leap that college coaches are expected to take and help a
Yeah.
program reach. And I was curious what Kalen DeBoer would say about year two when we asked him directly. His programs have taken big leaps in their second seasons. I mean, Fresno State went from 3 wins to 9. Washington went from 11 to 14, including an undefeated regular season and a trip to the college football playoff where they ultimately fell short to Michigan. So I wanted to know from him, what does that mean for Alabama? Like, we know what Nick Saban did. He went from 7-6, and then he went to 12-0, an undefeated regular season, a spot in the SEC championship game where they fell short to Florida. We all know what happened next. But look back at what Auburn did with Gene Chizik in his second season, right? Like, when they won a national championship in his second season, albeit with a couple of generational players on both sides of the ball, certainly. But the point is, fair or not, expectations are extremely high for head coaches in their second seasons. And if they don't get it done, then the pressure obviously mounts, and I see a lot of early success for Alabama and their schedule. You and I, we went game by game and we picked, how we thought, we picked each game basically and predicted the season. But, I think they beat Florida State. I think they beat Wisconsin, and they probably look good doing it before they're really tested in SEC play. But, Matt, if they're really shaky out of the gate and they struggle against what many consider lesser non-conference opponents in these power conferences, that's when the chatter on shows like ours and others, that's when all that starts. And the walls really do start closing in a little bit. And they already started to last year in his first year after these unexpected losses to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. And then obviously that dud of a bowl game against a depleted Michigan team. But I think it's clear that DeBoer believes what he is building right now, believes in what he's building right now. I think he's convinced that they have the right people in the program with the staff and the players on their roster. He believes in developing not just chemistry, but meaningful relationships, like I mentioned before, that translate to wins on the field. So, Matt, I mean, we asked him some silly and lighthearted questions, especially in that lightning round section that people should go back and watch or listen to. But, we also asked what we thought were tough and thoughtful questions, and he didn't duck any of them. He answered everything that we asked. And so I think that it's pretty clear that he knows what's at stake this year.
Yeah, and that year two thing, Ben, fair or not, it is kind of the way that the sport is viewed at this point. That almost, I would say you're going to lose the faith of at least half your fan base if you're not showing a clear leap forward in year two. And the problem here is, even though obviously it was a disappointing season by Alabama fan standards, there's not a whole lot of room to leap forward from 9 wins. The answer really is they got to be in the playoffs. And I think short of that, you're going to start to have a large chunk of the fan base asking the question, if he hasn't gotten it done yet, can he ever get it done? And again, I don't really like to delve into, is that fair or not? Because to me, as we've said on this show before, this fan base is a force of nature. It's like it would be like trying to say, I don't think the tornado should come towards my town. It You got no control over it, man. It's going to do what it's going to do. So I think DeBoer, what he has within his control is get your team as ready as you can and build the best starting lineup out of the best roster that you possibly can. And I think and we'll get into that in a minute here, but I think he's getting that part of it done.
For sure, and it was a really cool opportunity. We thank Kalen DeBoer and the Alabama program for the chance to just sit down, get to know him a little bit better. And if you haven't watched it or listened to it yet, I really encourage you to go back. Nick asked some really fun questions, and like I mentioned, that lightning round again shows off a little bit of Kalen DeBoer that you haven't met yet, that you haven't seen yet. I'm confident about it, and we got him to answer some pretty fun football questions, but also some things about his favorite sports movies, food that he likes in Alabama. We asked him, Nick Saban or Bear Bryant, who's the GOAT? His answer was really funny there.
I will say, if you're an audio only listener on this podcast, this is one worth checking out on YouTube, I think, and going to like actually see his reactions to some of these things, and because again they were face to face, so it's a little bit more of a glimpse into his personality.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was really fun. And thanks to Nick and our crew, including Clay Yeager and Gabe Bergriff and Will McClellan, who joined us. It was a good time. So, Matt, let's switch gears real quick. Let's talk about the recruiting job that Kalen DeBoer and his staff are doing right now. They're kind of on a tear over the weekend. Alabama scored a huge win on the recruiting trail. AL.com and our good friend Matt Stahl's report says that Alabama received a 5-star commitment. That's 5, not 3, Matt, from Xavier Griffin, one of the top linebackers in the 2026 class. His commitment was the second linebacker to join Alabama's class. Zay Hall was another person who announced his commitment last Friday. In Stahl's words, Kalen DeBoer and his staff have really caught fire on the recruiting trail. Last week, they got commitments from blue chip prospects, 4-star running back E.J. Crowell, 4-star tight end Max Sutter. This month, they've also gotten commitments from 4-star offensive tackle Sam Utu, 4-star quarterback Jet Tamala, 3-star defensive lineman J.J. Finch, 3-star safety Riel Kelly, and 3-star running back Javari Barnett. So a lot of names there that'll become more familiar to Alabama fans the closer we get to the 2026 signing class. But Matt, before we dive into this whole like 3, 4, and 5-star rating thing and why that does or doesn't matter, we heard a lot of chatter. There was anxiety about Kalen DeBoer's lack of experience recruiting in SEC country, right? Like they had a solid 2024 class already. And while they still need those national letters of intent to roll in, signed, obviously, what do you think of this recent sort of spate of success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sign that there is faith among up and coming recruits that this program is headed in a good direction, because I think like this is so much more complicated than recruiting used to be, because now we're talking about sort of terms and NIL money, and there's so many other factors playing into it. But ultimately, these guys, for the most part, don't want to play for a loser. They want to play on teams that matter, that get on national television, that are playing deep into the season and making playoff runs. And I think this is a sign that these guys, the higher rated guys, are buying into what Kalen DeBoer is doing and the direction that the program is headed. I think it's also interesting if you look at what he's prioritizing here. Uh, you know, obviously they've got a lot returning in the secondary right now, but those guys are going to be getting older and probably leaving. So they go out, they get one of the best cornerbacks in the country in Jordan Edmonds. That clearly a big priority for them, and trying to build for the future. A great linebacker, as you mentioned, Xavier Griffin, one of the arguably, it looks like from a lot of these services rating him in the top 2 or 3 linebackers in the country. So a lot of work into building the defense there, but also a highly regarded. Some of these services have him number 1 in the country at the running back position, EJ Crowell. And honestly, Ben, you know, it's not like Alabama has not had talent at running back, but for whatever reason, and it could be offensive style, it could be this transition between coaching staffs, but they have not had that superstar at running back, arguably since Najee Harris. I mean, I know, look, Brian Robinson's playing in the NFL. He's a very good running back and very highly regarded. But it hasn't. I mean, there was a time where Alabama was 4 and 5 deep with NFL caliber running backs. So it's interesting to see them go after a big name there again. And also, look, we have to talk about quarterback, which is always going to be really important. And Jet Tamala, by all reports right now, is a guy who is out at the Elite 11 competition and crushing it. And people are saying he's looking like potentially one of the best, overall quarterback prospects in that class. I think obviously that was going to be important for Kalen DeBoer. We know that's sort of what he's built his coaching career on is being able to successfully coach quarterbacks into running this offense. So I think that's what I always look at with a coach early on is not necessarily the whole class, but what are you prioritizing and what are you putting the most effort into recruiting to your program? And I think that offensive backfield and the back half of the defense seems to be what he's looking at moving forward after this season.
Yeah, I mean, going back to your comment about running backs, I saw a stat recently on Twitter where somebody had pointed out Alabama's last 1,000-yard rusher came 4 years ago, and it was Brian
Wow.
Robinson in 2021. So Jahmyr Gibbs, I can't remember. I couldn't remember if maybe at
Just
the end
didn't
of
get
this
a
by
lot,
the
just
end of the
didn't get a lot
season.
of carries. I mean,
Yeah, didn't get enough. We
yeah,
obviously know why, and then obviously Jalen Milroe was a rushing quarterback those next two
right.
seasons, and even with
And
backs like Justice Haynes and Jam Miller, they just didn't get enough carries
and
to
that is what,
hit that mark.
like, there's no question Jalen Milroe was a tremendous talent, and he did a lot of things well as a runner. But even for teams that have a running quarterback and run, kind of a read option, which Alabama didn't really do with Jalen Milroe, most of the time you look at the teams that are successful, and even with a running quarterback, they've got a 1,000-yard running back because it matters. It makes a difference. That guy has to take a different level of punishment. It's affecting the way the defense plays. I think it is important for Alabama to have a real threat at running back alongside whoever's playing quarterback for them. So they need if it's not Kroll, it's one of the guys they already have on the roster, which they have some very talented guys on the roster as well at running back.
Yep, still obviously have Jam Miller, projected starter in 2025. You got Richard Young back there, a big guy like Daniel Hill. So it seems like Alabama does have the talent back there, and it's good to see that they're still adding to it. So, Matt, my last question about recruiting. If you told Alabama fans 10 years ago during the peak of the Saban era that, the new coach would be flipping guys from Illinois, Iowa State, and Rutgers, and that they really might faint right in front of you. I mean, we keep hearing Alabama got a commitment from this 3-star or this 4-star from this non-SEC school where they were previously recruited. We've throughout the years too seen ratings go up and down. Sometimes suddenly the guys, are becoming 5-star prospects once Alabama has their commitment. I think we saw that with Keelan Russell as recently as
The
once he was
Bama
committed
bump
to
is
Alabama.
what fans of other teams call that, by the way.
Exactly. But Matt, I mean, are the ratings anything fans should concern themselves with at this point? Like, what do you read into that right now, if anything?
I think it tells you that how much recruiting has changed, and I know I just said that a minute ago, but it really is a very different game now. I mean, if you look all the way up and down the 2026 recruiting rankings, it's not like it used to be. This used to be very top heavy in terms of the 5 stars. They're all bunching up, and you're seeing, the top 3 or 4 or 5 teams in those rankings would have, you know, 5 or even 6 5-star players committed to them. It doesn't work that way anymore. Alabama actually has the most 5-star commitments of any program in the country for the 2026 class right now, at 3 in most of these services. So what you're seeing when Alabama is going out and flipping lower rated players, I think is what we would call this, in pro sports, is looking for value. If you've seen the excellent movie Moneyball, which I know Ben and I are both obsessed with that movie, I mean, you're trying to build a roster differently these days because you've got a budget for it. And some of that budget, kind of a lot of that budget, is going towards both keeping the players that you already have who you know are very good, or bringing in big name transfers from other schools that, again, have proven themselves at the college level. So high school recruits who have a lower odds of ending up being a great player for you, I think you have to be looking for value. You have to look for guys that maybe are a little bit less. There's the bidding is a little lower, perhaps, in the marketplace for them. But you've seen them and you've evaluated them, and you think they're underregarded and perhaps undervalued. And I think that the programs that do the best job at that, at identifying those guys, that's going to be a real edge for teams going forward, because you can't just go out and pay the maximum amount to every single 5-star and bring them all into your school anymore, in the way that Nick Saban was able to build a roster like that, because all those guys cared about was getting to the NFL and maybe winning championships, and nobody could offer better than what Nick Saban was offering at Alabama at that time. But there's a lot more factoring into the equation now, and I think being able to identify guys who are not superstars already at the age of 17, and you see them and you think, I think they're better than other people think, or I think I could get more out of them than people think. I think that's kind of the key to all of this.
So you're saying you can't replace Tyler Booker and Jihad Campbell, but you can recreate them in the aggregate, as Billy Bean says it in Moneyball. You're talking about Saban metrics now, Matt.
We're
That's what we
buying
call it
wins.
around here.
We're
That's
saving
right.
metrics. That's good.
That's right.
Yeah, we're buying wins.
There were players like that, though, even with Saban. Josh Jacobs is a great example of the guy that Nick Saban believed in. He saw something that these other teams didn't. And
Terrence Cody was too, by the way. I mean,
yeah.
I don't think he was particularly heavily competed for out of junior college, because most people saw him and said he weighs 400 pounds. There's no way he's going to be on the field after second down.
Yeah, and sometimes that can put a chip on the players' shoulders too, where they have this thing where they want to prove people wrong who didn't recruit them. Obviously, sometimes 5-star talent pans out. We talked about Bryce Young on a recent episode. So you want 5-star guys when and where you can get them, but sometimes, again, these coaches, they're very detailed analysts, evaluators of talent, and sometimes, just sometimes, they see things that their competitors do not. So we will see how they all turn out, and we hope for the best here. So we're going to take a quick break here on Beat Everyone, and when we come back, I have no idea what's going to happen when we come back, but Matt has something in store, so stick around on Beat Everyone. We'll be right back.
All right, we're back. As we mentioned at the top of the show, this is our 100th episode of Beat Everyone, and I thought, as a fun game to play to commemorate this 100th episode, Ben, I know we've had your prowess for Alabama trivia on display on this show before. I'm going to put it to the test today, okay?
Oh, man.
I'm going to give you 3 minutes to try to name 100 Alabama football players. Now, I look, if you don't get to 100, I'm sure that's the gimmick, because it's the 100th episode.
Okay.
I think you're going to get a lot.
Like all time?
Anybody, if they were on an Alabama roster, they're fair game here. I'm going to do my best to be marking these off. I also am going to try to remember to make sure that you don't repeat a name.
Okay.
But we may have to go check that in the film room later when we're editing. So
but you're gonna be marking as we go.
I'm going to be marking as we go to count these off. So you just rattle them off. We're going to start this in about 5 seconds here. 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay. Ramsey Robinson, Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Antonio Carter, Derrick Henry, Simeon Castile, Trent Richardson, Tyrone Prothro, Mark Barron, Eddie Jackson, Shaheem Carter, Andrew Zal, Devontae Smith, Jay Barker, Kenny Bell, Julio Jones, Freddie Roach, Christian Harris, Nikita Stover, Bryce Young, Henry To'oTo'o, oh gosh, 12, 13, Kelf Bailey, Tim Castile, Ron McClain, Christian Miller, Jamie Mosley, Kenyon Drake, Reggie Ragland, 21, 22, Mark Ingram, Najee Harris, Christian Jones, Jam Miller, Justice Haynes, 28, Javier Arenas, 30, Dante Hightower, Bobby Greenwood, Corey Reamer, Rashawn Evans, Reuben Foster, Anthony Jennings, Santonio Beard, Ahmad Galloway, Terry Grant, Shad Williams, Brody Croyle, Joe Namath, Kenny Stabler, John Rutledge, Barry Krause, Santonio Beard, I think I said, D'Amico Ryans, Nico Johnson, Robert Lester, Roman Harper, Jawan Garth or Jawan Simpson, Rolando McClain, Trey DePriest, Vinny Sunseri,
30 seconds.
Oh God. Okay. Tim Smith, Brandon Dedrick, Christian Barmore, Terrence Cody, Marcel Darius, Nick Perry. Geez, I'm running out of steam here. Tim Keenan, Jalen Milrow, Mac Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts. I guess that's it. We'll end on Jalen Hurts.
We're calling it right there. Okay. So we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 67.
67. Okay.
60. Actually, 68. We
okay.
Look, 68 in 3 minutes is pretty dang good.
The others would have crushed me with that, but I did my best there.
I don't think so. I honestly don't. I highly doubt anybody listening to this. If you go time yourself to try this and you get more than 68, message us. Let us know because
they'll do it. They'll do it.
So look, it sounded like your method was you're literally going through roster numbers and pulling out names that you remember having that number.
Well, I was trying to go 1 through 100, and I figured like I could probably get at least one person for every number.
I love the strategy there.
And then like once I was on 4 or whatever number, I could get multiple guys per number, and then just keep going up. So
the roster number memorization thing, I will admit that left me basically when I stopped being a beat writer. But I can remember like drilling myself on those for sure.
Man, I hate that I didn't get it though. That's kind of a bummer.
That's very respectable. I think your creds are well established.
All right,
here.
You put me on the spot. If you give me 5, I think I could have gotten it. Probably.
If you had 5 minutes, 2 more minutes, you would have absolutely hit 100. You were basically almost 70% of the way through.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for putting me to the test.
Yeah.
I failed, but
I think very, very impressive.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. I wish I had a game to let you play because you've been as much a part of these 100 episodes as anybody has, filling in for me admirably and better many times over the course of the year plus or however long we've been doing this. So thank you, man. Always appreciate it. And he is Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalisi. Thanks as always, Matt. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. And this has been episode 100. Join us next time as we continue our countdown of Alabama's 15 best games of the 21st century. The countdown continues. And until then, I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. Thanks, everybody.